Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain, and we look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking at the Ladies' Home Journal from August 1884, and our article is entitled Louisa Alcott. If you are not familiar with Louisa May Alcott, she is the author of Little Women. I have read Little Women a couple times actually. I also recently read it aloud to my oldest child, who really ended up loving it. Sat through the entire book, unabridged. I was very proud. Let's take a look and see what they have to say. I really hope that this is accurate and reflects Louisa May Alcott and who she was as a person. I will do a little fact-checking at the end, but first let's see what they have to say. It was in Germantown, near Philadelphia, November 29th, 1832, that Louisa May Alcott was born. Concerning this date, she writes, "I was born on the 29th of November. The same day was my father's own birthday, that of Christopher Columbus, Sir Philip Sidney, Wendell Phillips, and other worthies." She removed from Germantown to Boston, where in 1834 Mr. Alcott opened a school in the Masonic Temple, which Miss Peabody described in her book entitled Record of Mr. Alcott's School, first published in 1835. At the age of 8, Miss Alcott was unusually tall, and so lithe and active that even before she left Boston she could drive a hoop entirely round the common without once stopping, able to run faster than most boys, and therefore always welcome to share their sports. After her father left off school teaching, she went no more to school but studied at home. At 16, Miss Alcott wrote, for Ellen Emerson's pleasure, her first book. It was entitled Flower Fables. It was afterwards published, but not until 1854, when Miss Alcott was 22. It made no marked impression, its dainty fancies being obscured by too many adjectives. I'm sorry. I could just imagine, a creative writer who really wants to do a good job can sometimes talk out of a thesaurus, yeah? And I think that's kind of a tendency of people who want to be writers. That gets funny. And its illustration's so bad as to be anything but an adornment. Well, she's a writer, not an artist, yeah? Her first full-grown romantic story was printed in Gleason's Pictorial, and for this tale she received $5. It reminds me a lot of the character Jo in Little Women, yeah? I feel like she formed that character after herself. I think it's pretty certain. It was in 1868 that Mr. Alcott took to Roberts Brothers, those publishers whose names have been so intimately associated with all of the most successful and brilliant years of Miss Alcott's life. A volume composed of various stories with which the readers of newspapers were already familiar. Mr. Niles, one of the firm, read them and recognized their merit, but he said, "We do not care just now for volumes of collected stories. Will not your daughter write us a new book consisting of a single story for girls?" The result of this suggestion was Little Women. Miss Alcott says she wrote it to prove that she could not write a girl's story, having always preferred to play with boys. Of course she did. And therefore knowing very little about any girls except her sisters and herself, this matchless tale was sent to the publishers in about 2 months after it had first been asked for, with the amusing suggestion that if the title, the happiest title which juvenile book ever had, was not liked, the author would willingly change it for something else. The first part of Little Women was published in October 1868, but it attracted comparatively little attention until the publication of the second part in April 1869, when suddenly Miss Alcott became famous. I do not, of course, mean that the first part of the book was not widely read and cordially welcomed, but only that the actual furor began with the publication of the second part. Many young readers got quite desperately excited over the first, and one such enthusiast wrote to Miss Alcott, "Dear Miss Alcott, I have read the first part of Little Women and cried quarts over Beth's sickness, If you don't have her marry Laurie in the second part, I shall never forgive you, and none of the girls in our school will ever read any more of your books. Do, have her, please." All the young people who read the first part of the fascinating story were eager to get a hold of the second, and these readers talked about the wondrous tale to others, so that the sale grew and grew. The tide of her fortune was rising fast. As early as the 29th of December, 1869, she wrote to her publishers, "Many thanks for the check which made my Christmas an unusually merry one. After toiling so many years along the uphill road, always a hard one to women writers, it is peculiarly grateful to me to find the way growing easier at last, with pleasant little surprises blossoming on either side, and the rough places made smooth." This was the beginning of the most shining success ever achieved by any author of juvenile literature, so great a success that when Little Men was issued, its publication had to be delayed until the publishers were prepared to fill advance orders of 50,000 copies. Wow. That's an accomplishment, you know. She says Little Women was really the story of herself and her sisters, that's what I said, with such slight changes of time, place, and denouement as were necessary to make the tale complete. Meg, who afterwards became Mrs. Annie Pratt, with her genius for making a happy home. Amy, otherwise May, with her artistic taste and aspirations. Beth, with her sweet and gentle nature and her early death. And Jo, who was Miss Louisa herself. Did not Concord know them all, and smile at them as old friends when they looked at the pages of Little Women? Mr. March was Mr. Alcott, who did not, however, really go to the war, and Mrs. March was the dear house-mother, for whom the utmost praise never seemed to her fond child half good enough. John Brooke's Life and Death, Demi's quaint character, all the little domestic devices and diversions. These are history, as veritable as it is entertaining. Now, John Brooke did not die in the book. Did he in the second one? Because I haven't read Little Men. I'll have to go find out. But John Brooke did not die. I'm surprised that they're like life and death. Well, they mention Demi and then they don't mention Daisy. Seriously, they were twins. Give them a break. Miss Alcott certainly carries the burden of her 50 years lightly. If you met her now, you would see a stately lady, unusually tall, with thick, dark hair, clearly seeing, blue-gray eyes, and strong, resolute features full of varied expression. She never had a study, any corner will answer to write in. She is not particular as to pens and paper, and an old atlas on her knee is all the desk she cares for. She has the wonderful power of carrying a dozen plots in her head at a time, thinking them over when she is in the mood. Sometimes she carries a plot thus for years, and suddenly finds it all ready to be written. Often in the dead waste in middle of the night, she lies awake and plans whole chapters word for word. And when daylight comes, she only has to write them off as if she were copying. In her hardest working days, she used to write 14 hours in the 24, sitting steadily at her work and scarcely tasting food till her daily task was done. That's impressive. Very impressive. Very few of her stories have been written in Concord. This peaceful, pleasant place, whose fields are classic ground, utterly lacks inspiration for Miss Alcott. She calls it this dull town, and when she has a story to write, she goes to Boston, hires a quiet room, and shuts herself up in it, and waits for an east wind of inspiration which never fails. In a month or so the book will be done, and its author comes out tired, hungry, and cross, and ready to go back to Concord and vegetate for a time. When engaged in the work of composition, her characters seem more real to her than actual people. They will not obey her. She merely writes of them what she seems to see and hear, and sometimes these shadows whom she has conjured almost affright her with their wilful reality. She never copies and seldom corrects. From before these men and women, great and small, she pulls away the curtain and lets us see them as they are. That's interesting because in the movie, the 1994 or 95, I forget now, the movie that was made with Kirsten Dunst as Amy, they say, the character of Jo says, my mind comes alive with stories more real to me than any in the real world. And it says here, her characters seem more real to her than actual people. I feel like they took that statement from Louisa Alcott or from someone who talked about her, who knew their... I feel like this article is really quite well written and really paints a picture of who this person was. I'm quite impressed. I wasn't sure what to expect of an actual like biographical article because I haven't read one so far. So, but let me do a little bit of fact checking and just see what Wikipedia has to say about her. Oh, I'll have to include this picture. That's a gorgeous picture. So since it's on Wikipedia, I don't mind sharing it. I feel like that's pretty safe bet that it's in the public domain. All right, Louisa May Alcott, plus the fact that she died in 1888. Any picture of her could not possibly still be under copyright. All right. Okay, was an American novelist, short story writer, the poet best known as the author of the novel Little Women and its sequels Little Men and Jo's Boys. Raised in New England by her transcendentalist parents. Oh, that was also in the movie. Yeah, that's very insightful. Abigail May and Amos Bronson Alcott. She grew up among many well-known intellectuals of the day, such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry David Thoreau, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Cool. Alcott's family suffered from financial difficulties, and while she worked to help support the family from an early age, she also sought an outlet in writing. She began to receive critical success for her writing in the 1860s. Early in her career, she sometimes used pen names such as A.M. Bernard, under which she wrote lurid short stories and sensation novels for adults that focused on passion and revenge. Published in 1868, Little Women is set in the Alcott family home, Orchard House in Concord, Massachusetts, and is loosely based on Alcott's childhood experiences with her three sisters, Abigail May Alcott Nieriker, I guess that's Meg, Elizabeth Sewell Alcott, I guess that's Beth, and Anna Alcott Pratt, that must be Amy. The novel was well received at the time and is still popular today among both children and adults. It has been adapted many times to stage, film, and television. Alcott was an abolitionist and a feminist and remained unmarried throughout her life. All her life she was active in such reform movements as temperance and women's suffrage. She died from a stroke 2 days after her father in Boston on March 6, 1888. Oh, she didn't live very long. 55? Like, it's probably relatively average for the age, though. So far, factual things that they were talking about are absolutely 100% on point. They also mentioned her three sisters, who she also based the characters in Little Women on. I doubt that was a secret, and I don't think that was a secret today either. I mean, everybody kind of recognizes a writer in one of the main characters, you know. Oh, she was on a postage stamp in 1940, and she's buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, near Emerson, Hawthorne, and Thoreau, on a hillside known as Author's Ridge. Louisa's last known words were, "Is it not meningitis?" But it wasn't. She died of a stroke. But I can understand why she thought that. I mean, you know, meningitis is a bacterial infection of the brain. So she knew there was something wrong in her brain, you know, whereas a stroke is a blood clot in the brain. So, wow, this is really interesting. I'm really glad we read this. Like, I find this one very, very positive. What a great role model, you know, for women in general. And I love that the Ladies' Home Journal was forward enough to write an article about her. This is published in 1884, so this is before her death. This is during her life, when everyone knows that she is a feminist, that she is over the age of 50 and never married, but that she was very successful. And so I'm very proud of the editors of the Ladies' Home Journal for taking a stance that showed that they were open to displaying feminism and to not only have like traditional family roles. So, I mean, for 1884, that's very progressive. I am very impressed. I tip my hat to you. I don't have a hat, but that's okay. I'll pretend. So good job, Ladies' Home Journal. Yay. So, I'm very, very positively surprised. I think that was a very well-written, well-researched article. And while there are some aspects of the culture of the time, for example, not mentioning her parents' names, just calling them Mr. and Mrs. Alcott. But other than that, I am quite impressed. So, good job, Ladies Home Journal, and I hope that we can all learn something from Louisa May Alcott, who just did what she wanted to. She just lived her truth in that sense and wasn't really bothered by these stereotypes of the day. I mean, at least it doesn't seem like it. Just decided that she wants to be a writer and went for it. And learned from her mistakes and the things that she did at first when she was using too many adjectives. She realized that, the flowery descriptions is kind of detracting from the story itself. And so she let him go, And I'm very impressed that she was able to do that without any real guidance. Unless she got guidance from Thoreau and Hawthorne. Oh, that's really cool that she knew some very famous authors. So maybe she did get help from them. But it didn't say explicitly that she did. Maybe she just got some tips. But there wasn't really a creative writing classes she could have gone to in the age, which was my point, by having not as much help. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that Microfiche time capsule today. I thought that was really fun. And please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.